We'd like to welcome Dr. Ellie Schmelzer, who is both active in the world of physics and in the world of career mentoring. She was a senior scientific project architecture at PreScouter, specializing in aerospace and defense, and she's currently transitioning to a position at Collins Aerospace. She holds a BS and a PhD in physics. Her postdoctoral research focused on extragalactic black hole tidal disruption events. She spent 5 years at Yale as a postdoc in astrophysics and an associate director at the Office of Career Strategy. Also, while at Yale, Dr. Schmelzer was appointed a Branford College Fellow and a career mentor at the Career Network for Student Scientists and Postdocs at Yale. And in May 2023, Ellie was voted president of the Yale Club of Hartford. And in addition to presiding over this, Dr. Schmelzer serves on the board of the Yale Club of Hartford. Ellie is a lifelong dedicated mentor to undergraduate, graduate students, and postdocs. And we are very happy to have her here today to speak with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you all. Apologize, this is not going to be a physics talk, but I will try to make it as valuable as possible. And I want to keep it very casual, so I will be talking, but if you have any questions, even like personal comments, just shoot and I will interrupt my very humble speech and answer any questions. And then also at the end of the talk, Victoria can share my email address, and you can feel free to contact me, questions, comments, if you want to meet on Zoom. In person is harder, but not impossible also. I just really enjoy mentoring graduate students, undergraduate, postdocs, because I was there and I did a lot of thinking and a lot of analysis of who am I and why am I doing what I'm doing. So I may have some answers for you. Okay, so I forgot to mention in the bio a very important fact that actually qualifies me to do this more than any of the physics work I've done. And that's that I was the founding director of the Office of Career Services and Strategy at Icahn School of Medicine in New York City for 5.5 years. This had nothing to do with physics, which actually made it somewhat challenging because it was completely outside of my comfort zone in a lot of ways, but it was very rewarding. And we can talk about that also within the talk, and I can explain why I did that and how it made me feel and what I learned from it. But I just wanted to mention it as the reason why I'm talking to you about careers at all, because the physics background doesn't explain that. Okay, so I wanted to also explain the title, the elliptical career paths. So this is the initial title, which is based on my personal experience. Elliptical is sort of my career path. I always loved physics from childhood and was very dedicated to it for all my education. Then I stumbled into sort of a dilemma and kind of a situation, and I sort of divorced myself from physics for a little while I was directing that Office of Career Services and Strategy. But and I didn't realize whether or not I will ever be able to come back to anything technical. But I'm very happy to discover that I am returning, and that's why my path is elliptical. And since being in New York and doing the career services, then I was hired in Aerospace and Defense at a small startup doing much more technical work. All of a sudden, I didn't even expect to be hired, given that I had that gap in technical work, but they liked it, they wanted me, and they got me. Of course, that company, it was a startup, so they lost business, Aerospace and Defense, so they had to lay off the whole vertical, but that's okay. And that's why now I'm continuing in my elliptical path, and we'll be working at Collins Aerospace in space systems. And that explains the title. But since I did the title, I thought, well, that's kind of selfish because not everybody's career path is elliptical like mine. This is just one example. So that's why in the handouts, I changed it to a straight elliptical or just a random walk career path with a question mark, because for everybody, it will be a different thing. And also that reflects the picture much better. There's no ellipse in there. Anyway, so I wanted to explain this so that it's clear. I'm sure that your own career paths will be who knows what shape. It really is a big question that you will have to determine. Okay, so I wanted to have a few takeaways from this talk. If you lost track of what I'm talking about because it's a monologue, I don't have a presentation, slides or pictures or anything, feel free to lose yourself. But if you could take away a few things, these are the 4 things I want you to kind of think about. And I will go into them in detail in a second, but first I just want to list them. So I think one of the most important things in finding the proper fit of a career for you is to understand and analyze yourself. And that may sound very trivial. And you may think you know yourself, and you will be surprised because unless you focus on that task, you know some things about yourself, but it's a lot of fun self-analyzing. And because you're a physicist and you analyze a lot different phenomenon, that should be fun. Anyway, but that will help you understand who you are, which will help you find a very good fit in a career, which is important rather than force yourself to be in a career. Because if you force yourself, that will backfire eventually. You may be okay, you may be very successful for a while, but you need to be minimally happy on a personal level. And to do that, you need to know who you are. Okay, now, you may analyze yourself in theory and make a list of what you like and what you dislike, and that is not all that valid until you test all these assumptions. And believe me, when you test your assumptions of who you are, you may surprise yourself and discover that you may be wrong. And I discovered on many levels that I assumed them one way, but when I immersed myself in that situation, it turned out no. And I'll give you examples to prove this. So the third giveaway or takeaway would be to accept the possibility of being wrong. And that's not very easy, actually. So because we analyze the world, we think we're all very intelligent. So realizing that you assumed something about yourself that is completely not true makes you wonder if you can trust your judgment in the future. And it actually made me wonder that. And I thought, oh, I don't know anything anymore. How can I trust my judgment if I'm wrong about certain things? But maturity and wisdom and getting older allows you to accept that it's okay to be wrong and it's not really your fault, and it doesn't mean you're stupid. It just means that in the equation that you were considering, you didn't take into consideration variables that played a bigger role than you thought. And at the end, the result was changed because of that. And I'll give you examples. Lastly, when you test your assumptions of who you are, it's not enough to use these simulated testing. For example, you think that you would love to live in New York City, which I thought that was one of my assumptions. Well, visiting New York City multiple times turned out to be completely insufficient simulation of what it would be like if you actually lived there. Why is that? I don't know. But my conclusions from visiting, which I call simulated test of the theory that I love New York, gave me the answer that, yes, I love to live in New York. But then I did live in New York. And after the initial euphoria, I discovered that I don't love it. So I was wrong. So that was a big problem because I thought, how could I be so wrong? My entire life, I thought I would love New York. I visited 100 times. maybe not 100, but many times. So I tested my theory that I love New York, but in a simulated way, which ended up giving a wrong result. Anyway, so back to going into depth in each of these categories. When you analyze yourself, so try to find out what makes you happy. I know this sounds so simplistic, but the reason why this is important and relevant to your career is you may love physics and the topic that you're doing. Okay. However, depending on how much environment influences your well-being, that may be enough. You may not care if you live in a big city, in a small city, in the desert. You may not care, and then you're very lucky. However, some people are influenced by their environment, and their well-being can fluctuate, and your well-being may be compromised potentially. So it is important to find out what makes you happy in terms of environment in the big scale of where you live, all the shells to small scale. For example, do you require that your office has a window? I know this sounds, again, very simplistic, but there are people, and I know people who can get very down if they are in a corner with only artificial light. Okay, just an example. So, and this is very small, and you may think this is unrelated to your career, but it actually is, because over time, no matter how successful you are, if that influences you a lot, and maybe it doesn't, and again, you're lucky if it doesn't, but if it does influence you a lot, it can make you a bit miserable, and depending on how important this is for you, it may eventually affect your work. I don't know. That's why you are the ones that are making the list of what makes you happy and what not, but also you need to put values to how strongly these criteria influence you. And maybe they're weak, and if they're weak, then they don't matter. But for some, everyone is different. So that's why it's important to have a list of what can make you happy, but keeps you satisfied enough that that doesn't affect your work in a negative way. And similar examples would be, do you like working in a loud environment? Do you need complete silence when you're working? I know people of both types. It depends whether or not you can isolate noise or not, and if it can interfere with your thinking or not. And other factors similar that are environmental, that can help you narrow down a career, maybe not necessarily a career path, but when you choose a career, it's very good to be aware of yourself, because if you are, then you can influence the future and you can influence the circumstances to match your needs. And again, sometimes those needs are very crucial and other times not. Okay, so then you need to test your assumptions. And here it comes the flow chart that I have. After you know who you are and what you like, it's good also to know what your boundaries of your comfort zone, how far you can be pushed. For example, a lot of us are introverted, others are not. Now, even the definition of extroversion and introversion is different than what most people think. It's not about wanting to be among people and associating with people. It's more about whether or not you feel energized from being in those environments or not, or if you feel drained at the end of the day. It's good to know which kind you are, because then you can decide if teaching would be a good idea, or if you need to just do research, or if you could do both, or if academia is not your fit, or if it is. But all these questions come from who you are and what your boundaries of comfort are, because it is good to push those boundaries, and I've done that so many times. But at the end, it's good to not over push, because then you can break some boundary. It can be fragile, your boundaries. So anyway, I listed possible career tracks. The most obvious, of course, is the tenure track. And you're all either testing it now or will be testing it because you're in this environment already. And if you feel very satisfied in every way and you understand who you are and it matches enough, then you're kind of done and you don't even need me. But not many people are that lucky. So in addition to the academic tenure track, there are other options. And some of them can preserve the amount of research you do, because a lot of us do like to do research and we don't want to necessarily really do something completely different. And that's okay. You could do research in industry. The environment is very different. And it's difficult to describe, and we can talk on one-on-one. I've worked in the industry and I'm working in the industry. Yes, but the culture is different. But in order to know if you can fit in, again, it's good to know who you are and what you like and dislike and so forth. And then if you're not happy in the academic career tenure track, then you can potentially test other options. And some of them are related, like research in academia. They're research track scientists rather than teaching and research. Or you could just do teaching, or you could do research in industry, as I was saying. And a lot of companies do hire physicists and even astrophysicists. And you will have to be strategic to maneuver.
So even astrophysicists.
Yes, yeah, because, well, it's a bit more of a narrow topic, and it's not as well funded in the industry as biomedical sciences, which is what I saw.
It's useless, pretty much.
I didn't want to use that word, but yeah, it makes us happy because we seek knowledge, but all the practical world out there is not satisfied by people who are only after the knowledge, because they want to see a monetary return, and us seeking knowledge doesn't make money necessarily, not directly. But there are companies that do aerospace and defense, and that's what I am into. And that is as close as you can get to astronomy or astrophysics in the industry reliably. However, the risk is that industry varies a lot, and the clients, you can lose clients and customers, and so it's a bit unstable because it's not as crucial as the biomedical sciences. So unfortunately, I really wish that physics and astrophysics was so well funded like the biomedical sciences. There's so many more jobs and pharmaceutical companies, and it's easier to find jobs and you have more options, but we don't. But we can kind of be creative. Of course, there is data science and software development, and a lot of people in physics go into that, including IBM. There are a lot of commercial companies that can use scientists, and they will assume that you're a software engineer if you have the degree in physics, regardless of whether or not you like coding, which I never did. But I don't know why, but well, I know why, because sometimes it didn't seem to be as logical as I wanted it to be. Like the computer wasn't doing what I wanted to do, and the errors didn't make sense. And that really bugged me. But that's okay. Most people can code easily. Another option is academic administration, and that is fun, but it doesn't keep your attention as long as you would imagine. So I enjoyed working as a founding director of the Office of Career Services and Strategy. I worked with faculty directly. I was reporting to the dean of the medical school. So that was very nice. I felt like I had a lot of power. I had my office had budget of 30,000 that I can use any way I want. I had people under me and all that. So from a social point of view, it was interesting and fun, but eventually it was all the same, and I needed something more technical. My brain kind of really needed more challenge in the traditional way that I was getting challenged through physics and astrophysics and so forth. And that's why I felt so lucky when I was hired in aerospace and defense again, which I never thought would happen again. I thought I've lost it. That's another thing. Don't shortchange yourself. I mean, when I left being a postdoc, I thought, honestly, I'm giving up on physics. It's sad, but it's a choice, and I will be okay with that choice. And I really did not expect that I would ever be hired because we're so critical. I thought, oh, as soon as I have a gap in my work history, a gap doing something other than physics, who's gonna ever want to hire me in physics or engineering? But actually, that's not true. You can come back in an elliptical orbit and get hired again because there are not that many of us. And getting an education in physics is hard enough. People respect that education, and they don't think you forgot it only because you worked in something else for 5 years. And I really did not forget it, because when I started working in aerospace, it all kind of came back with a little referencing. So anyway, academic administration is a possibility. But for me, I was lucky that I was in a medical school. So I did get some intellectual satisfaction from learning little bits and pieces of medicine. I went to talks. I had access to the entire medical school. I never went to see a surgery, because blood, and I didn't know how I would react, but I could have done that. But I went to a lot of biomedical sciences talks, and at first you don't understand a word, but you go repeatedly and you start understanding more, and then you even have ideas about it without the background. So anyway, you could make academic administration interesting if you do it in a very scientific heavy institution, for example. But whether or not it will last, it's really a question for you, because different people are different. Okay, science policy is another option. Not of interest to me personally, but a lot of people do that. Most jobs are in Washington, D.C. And the work is kind of combining rules and regulations about science with politics and with funding and so forth. And it could be interesting. It's a different personality also. Politics and Washington, D.C., it would be very culturally extremely different than this environment. So be careful. And then lastly, management consulting. A lot of people in physics and engineering, biomedical sciences with PhDs are hired in management consulting. And it's interesting, it's challenging, but it's challenging in a different way. So as a physicist, you go very deep in one topic and you dig, and you know everything about it. In management consulting, what frustrated me, I did that in that startup, was that everything was very shallow, and you have to go from one project to another. Well, no, you have like 9, 10 projects at the same time. It's kind of like being in the army, although I have never been in the army. It's way worse. Probably. Not that I don't mean to say that army is bad in any way. All I meant to say is you spread yourself so thin that my desire was in a lot of the projects to dig deep. And that was a problem, because you're not supposed to, you don't have the time. When you have 10 projects, you can only give so much attention to each, enough to present in front of the clients, and then you have to move to another client and so forth, which was dissatisfying. I had a project with a company, a very famous company, which I cannot mention the name because I'm still under non-disclosure agreement, but they were building a rocket and they wanted to use nuclear thermal propulsion to send a rocket to Mars. I mean, this will happen, of course. It's just a matter of time. And so they wanted us to figure out what is the influence, what would radiation do from that reactor on batteries that are used in that rocket. Because in space, all you have in terms of energy is in batteries. There's no any other kind of system that you can plug in. And so they're lithium ion batteries. Actually, this is old technology, but it's still the most powerful and the most common. Anyway, so we had to examine, well, break down the radiation coming from NTP reactor into types of particles, then figure out the strength, the strength of these particles and how they would each influence those batteries. I was fascinated. I loved that project. So I wanted to spend my entire week learning about this and reading more particle physics and figuring out. I would have been fired if I did that because I had 9 other projects. So anyway, long story short, management consulting is very intense. I was working until 11 p.m. almost every day, which is okay. If you choose to do that, and you're okay with that, then that's okay. It can be very stressful. I would present in front of Northrop Grumman, then ULA, then, then Collins Aerospace, back to back in 1 hour. And the presentations were 160 pages long. Of course, you can cover the whole thing during your presentation, but you have to be able to answer questions over that entire presentation. So doing that back to back, I thought my hair is gonna fall off. Like the stress is incredible because these people have paid us thousands of dollars for this project and I need to be an expert. Anyway, it's challenging and interesting, but there's some disadvantages and those are just the depth to which, and just the constant running from one thing to another. So those are the most typical career tracks for physicists and astrophysicists. If you understand who you are and you try out as internships, try out as in any way you can, although that would be in contradiction to what I said, because that would be sort of a simulated testing and it may not give you the right results. But still, I don't suggest that you change career just to test unless you are absolutely sure that academia is not for you, which academia is fantastic. I mean, I have to say, after I've done all these jobs that at heart, what makes me happy is going after the science for the sake of knowledge. And the only place where you can do that, mostly just for the sake of knowledge, is academia. Everywhere else, you're accountable for the money that get in, get out, and I don't really care about that side of things, but anyway, so I will stop here and start allowing you to ask questions and we can brainstorm about what you're wondering and how what I mentioned reflects anything that you care about or have questions about.
Okay, so
yes.
Both the leaving and coming back to more technical sort of physics related work, the leaving, was it just like you were burnt out and thinking this wasn't right for you? And then like coming back to it, like how did that feel? 2, how did you go about it? I like the fact that you said, yeah, like you shouldn't sell yourself short, because I feel like I would also think those things if I had a
we're more critical of ourselves than almost anyone else is of us. It turns out, well, some of us are very critical. I'm extremely critical of myself, which is not a good thing necessarily. But anyway, okay, to answer your question, I was not necessarily burned out. I really enjoyed my time at Yale as a postdoc. But there were several factors that made me decide that I needed to change direction, either temporarily or permanently. One was that in astrophysics, I felt like I need to be a lot better at coding than I was. I mean, I could change a code that's already exists and modify it in a lot of different ways. I could write things to produce graphs and things like that. But if I had to write a pipeline, forget it. I mean, if I had infinite amount of time, it would have happened, but that's not practical. Anyway, so the coding was a bit of a stumbling block. Second, at the time when I was a postdoc, I was married, I had just given birth. And although career for me was always the most important thing, unless I'm damaging the rest, the sacrifice of going for a second postdoc. So I was offered a postdoc in Lubbock, Texas, but it was only guaranteed for 1 year. And I thought also Lubbock, Texas, knowing myself, analyzing myself, I thought I would not be happy. Apparently, nothing wrong about Lubbock. I hope nobody's from there.
I know you're from Texas. Yeah, okay.
I cannot get paid enough to live there.
Hey, all right. Okay, that's good. That's good. Well, people who knew Lubbock and knew me said, oh no, you and Lubbock, no, it's not gonna work. So anyway, I was willing to make sacrifices to stay in academia, but to a reasonable level. You know, I could move to somewhere where even if I lost the postdoc, I could get a different job.
Yeah.
And still be satisfied. But Lubbock, if I lost the postdoc, there was only funding for 1 year. What would I do? I mean, I would have to move again. And of course, that means 2 other people. So that was the second reason that I was willing to make sacrifices, but not completely just sacrifice everything for it.
Yeah, it makes sense.
And also that would have been my second postdoc at the time, and I don't know how it is at the moment. It was not required, but anyone who got a faculty position had 3-4 postdocs on their belt. It was just the reality. It was not required, but that's how it ended up being. So I thought, okay, this would be my second one. Then I'll have to move again, who knows where, and then maybe again, and then I apply for faculty, and who knows where that would be. So that was the main reason. And then the last little piece of the reason was I felt like I was more extroverted than a lot of my peers. And I felt a little lonely. Gigs on the 5th floor for a while, until I had a roommate. Well, I know. I tried so hard, but very different personalities. Well, I had several different roommates over time. So that was another little bit of a reason. It wasn't the deciding factor. I was able to suck it up. That was not going to be a problem, but a little bit of my personality. I liked people more. And that's why I went into career services, because I met over the 5 years, almost 2,000 students, postdocs, and graduate students. And I really loved that. And I was able to help them. And I was at a point in my life where I felt like I was getting older and I had accumulated a lot of knowledge and I was ready to give back. So it was perfect, but while it lasted. So back to your second part of your question, how did it was complete chance. So I, on Facebook, the Yale Postdoctoral Association is something I'm part of, or I'm friends with, and they had an advertisement about this company, which is a startup, and it was doing management consulting, but for science. And I thought, oh, that's fantastic. Oh, because I considered going into management consulting before, one of the million things I considered. Luckily, I withdrew my applications before I got an offer from McKinsey, because I decided again, analyzing myself, I'm really going to be miserable. I can do it and I will learn a lot, but it's not me. I mean, management consulting is, yeah. So I saw that ad for scientific consulting, and I thought, okay, I'm willing to try. And a lot of the whole soul searching for career is willing to take risks like that. So I contacted them, and boom, 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 boom. They immediately, one interview, second interview, I got hired right away. So it was by chance. I wasn't even looking again because I thought, who's gonna ever hire me in anything technical anymore? But they loved my background. And in fact, the interview was on spacesuits to make a two-page presentation that combines all the knowledge of spacesuits in 2 pages, and not to spend more than an hour and a half. Yeah, sure. Yeah. And then they asked us all, did you spend more than an hour and a half? I'm like, yeah, probably a little over 2 hours. It was like 8 hours. I wanted to understand this is not a super simple concept. There's history to it. There's developments, NASA and other companies. Anyway, so that's how it happened, completely by chance. And then while I capture that, I'm like, okay, I'm not letting go. I'm not going back to career services anymore. Although I still enjoy mentoring people, and that's why I'm here, but not for a job. I think I can do that as a hobby.
Yeah.
And that's why Collins is sort of I'm holding on to that. I'm back into something technical. So
Okay.
that was a very long answer.
That's great. Thank you.
But hopefully maybe it answered some other questions that other people have had. So what else do you want to hear?
Being from Bulgaria, did you have any issues with or like, do you feel like, you had perhaps less opportunities because you were an immigrant?
Yeah, definitely. So when I was getting my PhD at UCSB in Santa Barbara, I worked at Raytheon company, which is defense and aerospace. And a lot of the work there is classified. And so they do require citizenship for a lot of the roles, but not every single role. I was very lucky that they were heavily interviewing and trying to recruit, but I only had a bachelor's degree in physics at the time. And for any company, it's very easy to get a job immediately after a bachelor's degree because it's very easy to compare people. They have the same education, so they can figure out who they want.
So at that point, they were willing to sponsor your visa?
Oh, no. So they never sponsored my visa. That would be a stretch. But they had more roles open, more possibilities. And I ended up starting as an electrical engineer, then a systems engineer. But all of that work did not require citizenship. It was not classified. But I would say 70 to 80% of the jobs at Raytheon required it. But there were a few. And the very last part of Raytheon was Raytheon Vision Systems, which was all optics. And so for that, they did not require citizenship. But that was perfectly in line with my PhD work because I was doing astrophysics, in the optical spectrum. So did it make it a little harder? A little harder. I mean, for example, I also wanted to do internships. I did an internship at Fermi Lab when I was an undergrad, and that was not requiring citizenship, but 10 other internships I considered doing forbid me from applying because I didn't have citizenship. So yeah, it makes it harder, but not impossible. You just have to work harder and look harder and all that.
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for the wonderful talk. I just wanted to ask about something you mentioned briefly, especially if I really do want to do internships as a grad student to try to explore where try to analyze myself and explore where my strengths are. But of course, we know that grad students are under so much pressure to publish, and I'm not sure if I want to continue in academia or not. So and like doing an internship over a summer could make the difference of having an extra paper on our
Yep.
portfolio
I
or
was
not.
gonna
So
say, yep.
how did you make that decision? You say you switched as a postdoc, which I guess is even more important to publish if you want to continue. So how did you make the decision? Okay, I can sacrifice one or two additional papers to get this extra experience that is going to be worth it.
That's a complicated problem. So when you're a graduate student, yes, I would say, look, you have the opportunity to be on papers, an opportunity that will not be there forever. So if it was me, I would focus on the papers regardless of where you end up. Even if you leave academia, right now, yes, it would be much more impressive if you publish now as a graduate student. And if you left academia and you had those papers, they would be viewed as an accomplishment, even in industry, where if you didn't get those papers and you did an internship, you are sacrificing both academia, and then if you didn't like industry, you have really not advanced. Now, I understand the problem that you don't know if you want to stay in academia or not. What about maybe shadowing experiences instead of an internship? It's not going to be as valuable. And again, I'm going to contradict myself because I said simulated testing doesn't give you very good answers, but it's better than nothing. If you could do many shadowing experiences, then you don't sacrifice your career in academia. Generally, my advice is to, if you always thought you want to stay in academia, try very hard to stay in academia unless you discover there is no way. Don't give up easily, because getting back to, I mean, talking about elliptical paths, getting back into academia would not be as easy for anybody. I mean, I got hired at this scientific consulting firm, yes, but like if I try to get a faculty job now, it's impossible, like not a chance. So I would say while you're not in academia, just try to see if you can make it work and if you can be happy. And only if you decide no way, then industry, because you can always go from academia to industry, but going from industry to academia is going to be very, very hard. It's happened. Actually, there's exceptions to everything. I knew someone at Raytheon who worked for Raytheon for probably maybe 10 years, and then he got a faculty job in California, that is. I don't know the circumstances. It's not impossible, but it's very hard because, again, because you're not publishing, you're not in that environment. Yeah. Internships, or try to somehow do both. I know that sounds very hard, but be on the paper and do an internship. And lastly, I would say, maybe do an internship that promises you getting a paper out of it. Then you have a paper that's that comes out of industry, but it's also valid for academia. You have not, like, if you can find something that your advisor does that would be similar to something that a company does, so that you can fuse the two together in a symbiotic way, so that you can do an internship that's also advantageous for your PhD and for your advisor's interests, then you're risking a lot less and you're accomplishing both goals and you can really test. That's ideal, but I'm sure, I mean, I don't know what your topic is and what your advisor does, but it can be more straightforward or less. If you're in optics, for example, that would be somewhat easier to do because there are a lot of commercial companies that do optics, and you can do an internship like that and maybe publish, or even if you don't, it would still benefit your PhD. yeah, be careful. That's my, just don't divorce yourself from academia too early unless you're sure that you want to. Does that help?
Thank you so much. Yeah, that was
And
very
also,
insightful.
feel free to email me with questions afterwards. We can brainstorm more. Or if I knew what your field is, I could maybe be even more helpful with ideas. What is your field?
I do. I do astrophysics. I'm working on like black holes, basically. So very similar to what you had done when you were here.
Okay, well, it still depends. There could be variation
I work more on the theory side.
on the theory. Okay, yeah. Well, okay. We can talk more. Feel free to email me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure. Any other questions?
To ask a professor here, I wonder if you analyze yourself when you were thinking of your career path, like when you graduated from PhD, and like, did you ever regret it, like not trying out other possibilities?
Well, I was very boring. I was, my career path was a straight line. Okay, so I went to college. I was in physics major. I went to graduate school at Yale. Then stayed in academia and loved it. And I still love it, and I'm still doing it.
Nice. And you never thought about like other possibilities?
No.
You didn't do it.
So, and I'm glad I didn't.
Yeah, and that's why I was saying, if you're happy in what you're doing and you're honest with yourself when you say that you're happy, then you're lucky. Just, you don't need me, you don't need the stock. Your path is basically not just the perception, but it's also the reality. Yeah.
So maybe this is because I'm a little more on the extroverted side, but what to me, I've had a very, very career path. And to me, no matter what I'm doing, it's the people that I'm working with that make me happy and make me stay where I am, right? So how does that, is that just some sort of general guidance that some people have, or is that just a personal thing? And how would you say that influences you or not?
So to really be accurate with the answer, I need statistics, which I don't have. I don't know how common that is with people, but it must be somewhat common. One of the reasons people go into management consulting is because of the people that they'll be working with, colleagues, because the companies are very selective. That's something that attracted me, actually, that it was hard to get that job. So I thought, okay, I want that job because it's hard to get. It's so selective, they're crazy selective. But as a result, whoever gets hired is extremely multi-talented in many ways, both analytically and socially and computer-wise, and presents in front of people. So a lot of, when they ask you, why do you want to work for McKinsey or BCG, many people answer that it's because of the people that I've been working with. So it's not that uncommon. So I think that's important, very important to many people, unless you're doing something that doesn't involve people, in which case they wouldn't matter. So it will matter more the more you interact with people and less. But even when I was in career services, I enjoyed who I was working with. So I had two kind of groups that I was working with. I was very close to all the faculty and the dean, and that was wonderful. I was even on a committee that was evaluating fraud of PhD students, and we had to take away one student's PhD because we discovered that he was cheating. Yeah, that was pretty insane. But I never imagined that I would have the authority to be a voting member of such a committee. And I would never have been if I stayed in physics. So So I had the deans and the faculty, and it was very nice to feel not really an equal, but kind of in the neighborhood. And then I had the students who I was able to mentor. But also what was very important is that the whole institution was a medical school. So it was intellectually fantastic, you know, and as I was saying, I went to a lot of talks and I didn't care that I didn't understand much. But it kept me there. If I was a career services director in a middle school, or I would have never lasted 5 years. So the people, the environment, and the people are very important to a lot of people, especially the ones that think of themselves as extroverted. Very complex question of what you do in your career, and it's a many body problem. That's the problem. That there are a lot of it's influenced, those decisions are influenced by so many factors, and that's why you could be wrong in your assumptions. As I was saying, just about the environment, New York, I thought I was convinced, I could put money on it, that I would be the happiest to move and live there forever. And after 2 years, I discovered that there were things that really bugged me about New York. Yeah. So what am I trying to say is, yeah, so that means that I didn't explore all the variables that influence my level of satisfaction. And that's why this problem is hard in a way. But again, you can be lucky, like Charlie, and be happy from the start in physics in academia and just continuing that path. And that is the best possibility, because changing careers. So I was, you know, a physicist and an engineer at Raytheon. Then I was going to go into management consulting at the end of my postdoc career. And I prepared, and I could have had that job. I had the final interview ready to be scheduled at McKinsey. And I got scared. I thought, if I get an offer, I will have to accept it, because it's such a prestigious and very selective job to have. But then if I accept it, I'm going to be miserable traveling. Back in the day, this was before pandemic, they traveled all the time, all the time. That was one of the reasons I thought I wouldn't enjoy it. And there were other reasons. So yeah, so I've changed careers so many times. I'm really exhausted. But that's not the reason why I'm getting back to what I know best. It really is because at the end, that ends up being who I am. I need technical rigor and challenge. And if I don't have it, my brain feels like it's going to atrophy. Yeah. Yes.
So you talk a lot about, I guess, sort of like the job itself, and yeah, the technical aspects or lack of technical aspects. Did you ever consider like more like, I don't know, like work-life balance aspects when you're like switching careers or trying to decide what to do?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can talk about that a little bit, or like if one area maybe is like better for like having a life outside your career versus others that you found.
Yeah, sure. So management consulting is the worst of them all in terms of that. Although it's all relative, right? And if you talk to McKinsey, they will say, yes, we have work-life balance, and they do to a certain extent, but when you compare to other careers, it's the most challenging. You can still make it work. And they advertise all these women who have 2 or 3 children and they're partner in a management consulting firm, and they can manage and they're okay. It's possible, yes. And you just will have to prioritize, but it's still not the easiest. I never considered that as a huge factor for me, except that with management consulting, the traveling would have just been very hard, but not necessarily the long hours, because in academia you end up working long hours, and that's okay, but you love what you do, and so you don't mind. It's a question that you never should ask on an interview, by the way. sorry to say that, but employers would think, oh, she wants to make sure that she has a lot of free time. She may not be a hard worker, you know. And I know that's unfair for them to think, but it's the reality that they may think that. So in order for you to find out if a job will give you the work-life balance, try to read about the job, talk to people, just don't do it during the interview. Anyway, outside of management consulting, the rest of all the jobs are fairly similar. Raytheon and the defense contractors have very good. They're very slow. I mean, progress is made over years and years and years. Collins, at my interview, they said, well, the last part we built took 25 years, and this one is due in 2 years. Can you help us, accelerate? So because it's so slow, the work is really segmented into thousands of pieces, which means you never stay past 5 or 6 p.m. at work. So that would probably have the best work-life balance, with some exceptions.
It's 1:02, so I don't know if we have any final questions.
Yes, wondering, like, when you were a graduate student, you was also working for Raytheon.
Raytheon, yeah.
Was it hard to balance like those jobs?
I needed the job because although I was also TAing, for some reason the money was not enough. I'm not sure why, but as a graduate student, we were also paid, but then the grant I was paid from was from Los Alamos, and there was a big scandal with a breach of confidentiality during that time. There was a huge, I forget the details, but there was a big security breach in Los Alamos, and so funding was kind of frozen for a long time. So my advisor could not pay my stipend temporarily for maybe a year and a half. And so I already had the job, but if I didn't have the job, I don't know what I would have done. It would have been a disaster financially. So was it difficult to balance? It was not somehow. I don't know. I mean, my project was building instrumentation, and similar to Collins Aerospace and other places, building instrumentation takes a long time, because you build something, then you realize you don't have this part, then it turns out you get the part, but the part is not ideal, so then you get another part, and then it's a long process. And so my PhD was stretched a little longer than like a theory PhD, and therefore it was not quite as intense every day, and that allowed me to have the part. I was working part-time, to make it clear. I wasn't working full-time and graduate school part-time. It was possible, yeah. Anything is possible. I mean, sometimes I feel like the more I push myself and I put a lot on my plate, actually I become more efficient. And I can actually get more done. There probably is a limit to that.
Thank you very much.
Yes.